All right, Jon Ledyard joins us, longtime Bucs NFL draft reporter. He's got a podcast, the Audibles and Analytics Pod. What's up, John?
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. So Tampa winning the division's become an old hat for you guys, huh?
Yeah, it's funny. Around the league, I think there's just this kind of ignorance of the NFC South. That division doesn't matter and stuff. But, if you look at how Tampa got there, just the transition out of the Brady years to be a team that can do this consistently, that has won the division now 4 years in a row, playoffs 5 years in a row, more than any other team in the NFC. And they're far from like this perfect loaded roster at every single position. I mean, certainly they've got plenty of talent, but they're not like, all priced out, all in type of team, even like Atlanta was. So it really is remarkable. It's Tampa Bay, and so they're not going to get a lot of national coverage, but it's really impressive, the organization they've built there and the fact they get players to stay. It's just been a really masterful job by Light. Not many people navigate out of an all-in window and continue to make the playoffs the way they did.
So, John, this playoff matchup is a rematch from Week 1 when the Commanders lost to the Bucs 37-20 in a road game. How much different is this Bucs team now that they're going to face in the playoffs than that Week 1 team? How have they progressed through the season?
Well, the biggest difference between them, and I think this, that Week 1 game is kind of a throwaway for both these teams in evaluating this upcoming game. But the biggest way the Bucs are different is just their ability to run the football. I mean, they're one of the best rushing teams in the league. And in Week 1, they were really still finding their way in terms of that stuff. They started the season as a zone-heavy rushing team. They were going to be an outside zone run team. They were going to boot off of that. There was going to be a lot of their play-action game was going to be off that. And after a couple of weeks, Liam Cohen was like, I don't know that this is what we do best from a running back's perspective or from an offensive line perspective. So he really, in the midst of the season, transitioned the team to be more of a gap power, vertical, downhill run scheme. Now, they run everything. The Bucs are one of the most multiple, versatile run schemes in the league, but they started out as they were going to base outside zone was going to be their thing. They were going to be one of those types of teams. And Cohen just adjusted sort of on the fly, and the changes have fit the players so much better. They are a great pulling team. They've probably been one of the most successful counter teams in the league this season. Obviously, Bucky Irving's role has increased. Rashad White's still a really good player, but Bucky has become like the more heavy touch back, which I did not see early in the season. White is really good third down back and a great change of pace player. And so they've really found their identity, I think, in the run game, and they found some things they do really well in the run game. The pass game, not as many changes, but just the fact that they can be as multiple as they are and run the football the way that they do and get as many splash plays from the run game, I think makes them way more difficult and more interesting to defend. That's not a wrinkle that's been a part of Tampa Bay's success over the 4 years previous to this. So this is a pretty big added dynamic for them.
John, you touched on Bucky Irving there. I wish I had really listened when the fantasy pundits, like around week 6 and 7, were like, go get Bucky Irving. He is going to win you fantasy leagues. And he's been a real find for them as far as Rashad White kind of, goes back and forth between being a real running back and a guy who catches balls out of the backfield. But like Bucky Irving is that hammer they can give the ball to 15, 18, 20 times per game. And the way that the Commanders struggle at stopping the run, I think that's going to be a huge part of the Bucs game plan this Sunday night.
Yeah, it definitely is. And Bucky's an interesting player because if you watch the all 22 after, you can see kind of this is where this run should hit. And he doesn't always go there. He's kind of an improviser a little bit, and he'll make some wrong reads, but he's so good at breaking tackles and he's so slippery that he often gets positive outcomes out of those decisions anyway. So I think, you watch this past game and he ended up running for plenty against the Saints because he had a couple long ones toward the end. But for a while, if you watch, it's a lot of the Saints controlled him pretty well because everybody kind of did their job. And that is really the strategy. I think if you're playing Tampa Bay, can everybody do their job? And keep backside contain, all of those things, because he will improvise off of things that sometimes maybe when he shouldn't. But he's so good and elusive that I think that part of it still ends up being successful for him a lot of the time. And the other way to kind of attack him is in pass protection. If the Bucs do try to keep him out of protection situations, he's not terrible. He's very willing. He's just smaller, and he doesn't have the technique that Rashad White has. But teams for about the last 6 weeks have had a lot of success blitzing when he's been in the game, adding on if he does stay in. And so the Bucs have countered that by getting him out a lot of the time and trying to force teams to cover him. more, but there's still times, a couple times every game in which he has to protect, and that's just how it is. If you're going to play major snaps, you can't be too predictable in what you do, and those times have been consistently kind of taken advantage of by opponents. So Washington being able to look and find and game plan for those times and when to send extra, I think that's going to be a key to them defensively having some success against the Bucs.
Talking to Jon Ledyard, longtime Bucs NFL draft reporter. He's got a podcast, Audibles, and Analytics. We should talk about Baker Mayfield. 41 touchdown passes this year. He did throw 16 interceptions. What did you see from Baker this year?
Yeah, I mean, the issue with Baker when he has it is that basically he just gets sped up, and he doesn't necessarily even something that an opponent does to him. He just will do it to himself at times. He just speeds himself up. There was a stretch there during this, like since the bye week, where he was actually, his numbers were way down against the blitz. And then the last 2 weeks, they're way up against the blitz. And so it just, there really is like, no, you try to find statistical patterns. You try to find things on tape, things that an opponent are doing. 1 week he can shred it. The next week he can overthink it. And he's turning down things and he's holding the ball too long. And he likes chaos. He really does. Like that's where he sort of in his mind thrives in chaos. But physically and athletically, he's not always as capable in chaos as he'd like to believe that he is. Now, you have a game like he had against the Saints in Week 18, and he was absolutely unbelievable in chaotic situations. And so that is really kind of the barometer with Baker. Does he stay under control? Does he keep his eyes downfield against pressure? Does he able to evade and work the pocket? Or does he stay still, locked into one spot in the pocket, drop his eyes as soon as there's a pressure, and not throw to open receivers and hots the way that he should on time? A lot of his issues have been just not getting the ball to a hot or a check down, instead trying to duck and avoid a sack and then make a play. And that's just a risky way to live. But if you talk about what's great about Baker is that enough athleticism to beat people with his legs, as you saw against the Saints yesterday. And the other part is just every throw is on the table. It used to be people thought, he won't use the middle of the field. That hasn't been an issue at all this season. He throws consistently in the middle of the field accurately. He can rip the football. So all the throws are on the table in terms of the menu of the Bucs offense. And that, I think, is what makes him such an ideal fit, is that he doesn't limit Liam Cohen from a play calling perspective at all. He can go under center. You can spread the field. He can work from shotgun. He can roll out and throw on the move. Everything's kind of available to Liam Cohen. And so, yes, the turnover-worthy plays, which he hasn't had any last 2 weeks, so we'll see if that ends up moving in that direction. He had an interception, but it was off a tip ball this past game. And so we'll see if he can keep avoiding mistakes. But when he avoids those plays and sacks, that's when he's at his best. A lot of the time, though, he'll take a lot. It's like the fact that he's been sacked 40 times this season. He's one of the least pressured quarterbacks in all of football. So his pressure to sack rate is over 25% this season. That's not good enough. And so he's got to get that down. You cannot be getting sacked given as infrequently as he's been pressured this season. So that part of his game's got to improve if they want to make a run in the playoffs.
So pretty cool moment to see Mike Evans tie Jerry Rice with the record. It looked like the whole crowd went wild. Obviously, the teammates went wild. I wanted to get more. We know a little bit about the Latimore Evans history. What do you know about it? Should Latimore play against Mike Evans?
Oh, it's absolutely for real. It's not a media manufactured thing. It really is not. Now, when they met earlier this year, when Latimore was still at the Saints, Latimore, I don't know what was going on with him when he was at the Saints. I mean, you guys have probably seen some of the tape, but he really wasn't even trying to tackle people. Like, he just wasn't engaged. He wasn't locked in mentally. And, I don't know what that's going to look like now, but, he wasn't really locked in that way this season. And so the Saints actually covered Evans with Paulson Adebo before he got hurt most of the time when they did go to man coverage, and it wasn't really Latimore with him. I don't know how the Commanders are going to play it, but let's just say hypothetically they do get matched up in some capacity. I mean, there is no love lost between the two. They actually do not like each other. And it comes out almost every time that they play. Very competitive, lots of chirping, lots of physical play. For years, the Bucs ran an offense that was basically like, if you want to put your best corner and a safety over the top, which the Saints would do all the time against Mike Evans, that's fine. We'll just throw to Chris Godwin or Antonio Brown or Rob Gronkowski or one of these other guys that they had. This offense with no Godwin and obviously no Gronk or AB is a little bit different, and they've used Mike Evans way differently. He's playing in the slot a bunch. He's just running a way more diverse route tree, a lot more in-breakers than vertical balls compared to the pass for him. So that is really allowing them to stay away from certain matchups, to be able to get Evans open and run the offense through him, where in the past they just say, if you want to take him away, that's fine. We just won't throw to him. We'll use him as a decoy and we'll open things up for other people. So it's just different philosophies, but given the fact that the Bucs don't have as many high-end options, although Jalen McMillan is coming on pretty well here. But given the fact they don't have as many high-end options as they had during those sort of prime years when they were in a Super Bowl team and making those Super Bowl runs and winning a Super Bowl, they have had to play more through Evans, and I think Liam Cohen's done a wonderful job of doing that. So I don't know that we'll see Evans and Latimore matched up 1v1 a ton, given how Washington plays defense and given the fact that Evans is moving around and not quite as easy to take out of a game plan as he used to be just based on his usage. But when they go up against each other, yeah, I mean, they've had multiple fights on the football field. Evans has gotten thrown out of a game, maybe two. I can't remember. Before I covered the team, there was a scrap. So it's just, I mean, Latimore's gone tossed. Like there's absolutely, they really do hate each other.
Who's gotten the better of the two?
Well, Evans has rocked Latimore twice in the actual course of their physical interactions that they've had. Once was early in his career. Latimore had his back turned and he shoved Jameis Winston to the sideline, and then later there was an incident with Leonard Fournette, Tom Brady, in a more recent one, and Evans kind of grabbed Latimore and threw him on the ground, and then there was a whole tussle between everybody else.
But has he locked him down? Like, has Latimore done a pretty good job of like you say, like kind of eliminating him, or no?
Yeah, I think so. The way that I see it is throughout the early or late 2018, 2019, 2020 stretch, Latimore did a really, really good job on Evans. Now, like I said, the Bucs were really content just to say, hey, if this is how you're going to play with your best corner, we're not even going to look. So Evans would be open sometimes. They just didn't even throw him the football, or there was safety helping. And so there were a lot of variables like that. And then over the last couple of years, as Latimore started to really fall off and injuries, and he wasn't really at his best or always engaged the same way, Evans really got the better of him quite a bit. And, there were some penalties where it came out more in penalties than it did in actual catches. But Evans had started to have his way with him toward the end of that matchup, which is probably why the Saints didn't elect to put Latimore on him earlier this season when they met.
Were the players asked like which team they'd prefer, that sort of thing? Because I know that our guys were, and it was like radio talk show fodder. Who would you rather play? The Rams, the Bucs, the Eagles, whatever. What's sort of the prevailing opinion on the Commanders, given that you guys, had so much success early on, but that I think the team has grown quite a bit. Both teams, I'm sure, but certainly the Commanders are a better football team now than they were in week one.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the Commanders are way better offensively. The Bucs are worse defensively. We'll see if they get some players back from injury here in the next couple of weeks, but the Bucs have really struggled defensively. They put together some good second halves recently, but the level of competition is just so much worse than what Washington's been this season. One thing they did so poorly in week one, the Bucs did, was contain Jaden Daniels. They are a very bad contained football team. They run a lot of twists and stunts up front, which can occasionally get you home. Like if you watch the game against the Lions, the Bucs beat the Lions largely because the Lions could not control their twist game, and Jared Goff's not really a threat to get out of the pocket in those situations, so they were able to have success doing that. Well, if you do that against Jaden Daniels, you're going to get shredded because he'll get outside the pocket, he'll make plays with his arm and his leg, and you lose contain in your rush lane. So really, if the Bucs are smart, they will change some of what they do and adjust to that. I don't know if that'll happen. Bowles can be a very stubborn defensive coach, and so I think, to me, honestly, one of the biggest keys of the game is, do they contain Jaden Daniels in the pocket or not? I think if they do, then they'll have some more success defensively, but that is like one of the biggest things, because Daniels, when you let him get out in space, just an unbelievable athlete. He's physical. He gets more of his moxie, I think, when he plays. He gets kind of juiced up from those situations. But they're just such a better, Washington before, if you watch that tape from week one, the Bucs, Washington had options. They could have made some plays, and Jaden Daniels just didn't pull the trigger on a lot of throws. Well, he's pulling that trigger now. So, Tampa Bay, I think that game seemed very one-sided at the time, but if you go back and watch the tape, you'll see that there were opportunities for Washington, and they did not make the Bucs pay in the way that they should have. And then, as you saw as the season went on, other teams that have made the Bucs pay, and that defense is really struggling. So I think it's going to be a really tough matchup. Containing Daniels is the first step, but all over the field, there are really players and issues that the Bucs have defensively that I think they're going to have their hands full with Washington.
Good stuff, Jon. Appreciate the insight.
Absolutely, guys. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, thanks
for the time,
Jon Ledyard, longtime Bucs NFL draft reporter.
You put a gun to his head, he'd pick us.
He sounds a little concerned.
Yeah. I like that.
Well, he knows Jaden Daniels has developed since that first game.